home and thought everything was under control. But on his daughter's birthday, he opened the door of an old barn and saw something that changed his life forever. Subscribe and write where you're watching this video from. Michael Harper was a man who knew how to conquer silence. It filled the tall hallways of his estate, moving through the marble floors and crystal chandeliers like a cold breath that no one else seemed to feel but him. The staff, with their polite smiles and carefully measured steps, passed through the house without disturbing the stillness that had settled there since the day Lauren died. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath, as if afraid to shatter the fragile peace Michael had built around himself and his world. Lauren's pictures still hung in the main hallway, framed in gold, showing her laughing in a garden, her dark hair pulled back, holding little Leah in her arms, the child's bright eyes reflecting the softness of the woman who had loved her fiercely. Lauren had insisted they adopt Leah, a 3-year-old girl with dark skin and wide, curious eyes, from a shelter that Lauren visited every week. "She will have a chance, Michael," Lauren had whispered to him late at night when he worried about the business, the shareholders, the reputation. "She deserves a family. Our family." Back then, Michael had believed he could be that family. He had believed that love, once offered, would remain unshaken by time or grief. But grief was a quiet predator, creeping into his chest until each breath felt like a reminder of his failures. After Lauren's sudden passing from an illness that left the doctors shaking their heads, Michael had tried to hold Leah close, telling her that everything would be all right, that they would get through this together. He remembered the way her tiny hands had clung to his sleeve, the way she had sobbed into his chest, asking when Mommy would come back. And then the phone calls began again, the meetings that could not be postponed, the contractors and architects who needed his decisions, the hotels that needed his presence. It was easier to leave, easier to believe that money and safety were enough, that providing Leah with the best schools and the safest home would fill the space Lauren had left behind. It was easier to let silence grow. Into this silence came Amelia. She was young, 32, with blonde hair and eyes the color of polished steel. She had been working in the PR department of one of Michael's smaller hotel branches, known for her efficiency, and a smile that made others lean in when she spoke. Michael noticed her during a tense meeting with investors, the way she handled a crisis with calm precision, the way she looked at him with careful respect. She seemed to understand his grief without pressing him to speak of it. She told him that he deserved to have someone who cared for him, that he deserved to live again. They married quietly, a small ceremony with polite applause and whispered blessings. The newspapers praised the match, calling Amelia the perfect second chance for Michael Harper, a man who had suffered too much, too young. The photographs showed a beautiful family. Michael, tall and distinguished, Amelia with her bright smile, and Leah standing in a white dress, holding Amelia's hand, looking into the camera with solemn eyes. Leah was 8 now, her skin a warm brown against the pale tones of the household, her hair a mass of soft curls that Lauren used to braid with bright ribbons. She wore clothes that were always too large, clothes that once belonged to Lauren or that Amelia found on clearance racks, saying it was wasteful to spend on children who outgrew things so quickly. Leah often stayed in her room, sitting on the edge of her bed, holding a small stuffed bear that Lauren had given her, whispering secrets into its ear when the house was too quiet. Amelia kept the house immaculate, each room a showroom of taste and wealth. She took over everything with the grace of a woman who knew how to command a space, telling the staff where to clean, which flowers to place, how to prepare the meals. She smiled at Leah when Michael was home, calling her sweetheart and dear, tucking stray curls behind Leah's ear with a practiced gentleness that never reached her eyes. But when Michael left for meetings, the smile would slip from Amelia's face, replaced by a coldness that turned her eyes into glass. She would give Leah lists of chores, telling her that it was important to learn discipline, to learn to be useful. "Your mother would want you to be useful," she would say, ignoring the way Leah's shoulders tensed at the mention of Lauren. Leah learned quickly that silence was safer, that speaking up brought the sharpness in Amelia's voice, the tightening of her lips, the cold glare that made Leah feel small. Michael did not see these things. When he was home, he would pat Leah's head gently as he passed by, telling her he loved her, that he was proud of her. She would nod, hugging her bear tighter, her eyes following him as he disappeared into his office to take calls, handle emergencies, handle everything except the quiet fear that was growing inside his daughter. At night, Michael would stand by the window in his study, looking out at the garden that Lauren had planted, and the roses that still bloomed because the gardener knew how much Lauren had loved them. He would take a deep breath, close his eyes, and imagine Lauren there, her laughter filling the space around him. He would whisper, "I'm doing my best," into the darkness, as if she could hear him, as if saying it would make it true. But Leah could see the truth, even if she could not say it. She saw the way Amelia's hand would tighten around her wrist when she dropped a spoon or spilled a glass of water. She heard the hiss of Amelia's voice when she made mistakes, telling her she was clumsy, telling her that she should be grateful for what she had. Leah learned to move quietly, to hide her drawings in the pages of old books, to keep her head down when Amelia entered the room. Sometimes Leah would take the small bear and sit in the hallway outside her room, pressing her back against the wall, listening to the sound of the house breathing. She missed Lauren's songs, the way her mother would hum as she brushed Leah's hair, the way she would kiss the top of Leah's head and tell her she was loved, so loved, loved enough to fill the world. Leah would whisper the words to herself over and over, trying to remember how they had felt when Lauren said them. One evening, Leah heard Amelia on the phone, her voice sharp and angry. "She's not mine, and she never will be," Amelia snapped. "I'm not her mother, and I don't care what Michael thinks. I'm not wasting my life on a child that doesn't belong here." The words cut through the quiet, sinking into Leah's chest like ice. She clutched her bear tighter, backing into the shadows, hoping that Amelia would not see her, would not notice the tears slipping down her cheeks. That night, Leah crawled into her closet, closing the door behind her, sitting in the darkness with her bear pressed to her chest. She whispered to the shadows, telling them she would be good, that she would be quiet, that she would not cause any more trouble. She promised her mother that she would try harder, that she would not cry, that she would not make Amelia angry. She fell asleep there, her small body curled around her fear, the house silent around her. Michael returned late that night, the moonlight spilling across the marble floors as he walked through the house. He checked on Leah, finding her bed empty, the blanket folded neatly as if untouched. Panic flashed through him for a moment before he found her in the closet, asleep, her bear clutched in her arms. He lifted her gently, carrying her back to bed, tucking her in, brushing a curl from her forehead. She stirred, her eyes opening for a moment, looking up at him with a confusion that broke his heart. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice small. "I'm here," he said softly, forcing a smile, kissing her forehead. "Go back to sleep." She closed her eyes, but the tightness in her small hands did not ease, even as she drifted off. Michael stood there for a long time, looking down at his daughter, wondering if he was doing enough, if Lauren would be proud of him, if Leah knew how much he loved her. In the darkness of that quiet room, the house held its breath again, the shadows on the walls dancing softly in the moonlight, whispering secrets that Michael did not yet know how to hear. The morning light in the Harper estate fell in soft sheets across the polished floors, moving silently through the long hallways where portraits of Lauren still hung, their glass surfaces catching and reflecting every shard of dawn. Leah sat on the edge of her bed, her legs dangling, toes brushing the carpet as she clutched her small stuffed bear. The door creaked open, and Amelia's figure filled the frame, her hair tied back, her robe neat and cinched at the waist, her eyes scanning the room as if taking inventory of every misplaced object. "Up," Amelia said, her voice calm, but there was something in the way her eyes narrowed that made Leah's stomach tighten. Leah slid off the bed, quickly pulling the blanket tight, smoothing it down with careful strokes of her small hands. She checked and rechecked the corners, flattening the wrinkles, glancing back to see if Amelia was satisfied. A slight crease remained at the edge, and Leah's fingers trembled as she tried to fix it. Amelia stepped forward, reaching past Leah to straighten it herself, her movements quick, precise, as if correcting a personal failure. She said nothing as she turned to leave, but Leah could feel the weight of disapproval lingering in the air. Downstairs, the house was already alive with the quiet movements of staff, the clink of dishes, the soft vacuuming of the long carpets. Leah sat at the kitchen table, swinging her feet, her eyes following the steam rising from the oatmeal in front of her. It was cold. She picked up the spoon and took a small bite, the lump in her throat making it hard to swallow. Across the kitchen, Amelia's voice directed the staff, pointing out streaks on the windows, crumbs on the counters, a smudge on the floor Leah had walked across the night before. "Finish your breakfast, Leah," Amelia said without looking back, her hand flicking toward the bowl. Leah took another bite, the coldness of the oatmeal pressing against her tongue, swallowing quickly so she would not gag. She set the spoon down, the clink louder than she intended, and flinched as Amelia's head turned slightly, eyes glancing at her with thinly veiled irritation. Leah quickly picked the spoon back up, stirring the oatmeal, forcing herself to take another bite. After breakfast, Leah was given a list. It was a small note card, Amelia's neat handwriting filling the front, outlining the chores for the day. Dust the library shelves, clean the fingerprints off the glass doors, fold the laundry in the basket by the stairs, sweep the hallway, clean up any crumbs from the dining room carpet. Leah took the card in her small hands, holding it carefully, as Amelia explained each task as if Leah were incapable of understanding simple instructions. Leah nodded, clutching the card, her fingers leaving small smudges on the edge as Amelia wiped her own hands on a cloth, eyes scanning Leah's face for any sign of resistance. "If you finish these properly," Amelia said, "then you may have lunch." The word "properly" was always heavy, a weight that Leah carried in her chest as she moved through the house. She started with the library, standing on her tiptoes to reach the higher shelves, carefully moving the books so she could dust behind them, placing each back exactly as she found it. She could almost feel Amelia's eyes on her, even when the woman was not there, her gaze a cold whisper in the back of Leah's mind, reminding her to be careful, to be quiet, to be invisible. Leah tried to remember the way Lauren used to clean, singing softly under her breath, sometimes letting Leah help, lifting her up so she could dust the top shelves, laughing when Leah's small hands left streaks on the wood. Now there was no singing, only the sound of the duster moving across the surfaces, the soft sound of her own breathing, the way her heart would thump when she dropped a book or knocked something out of place. After the chores were finished, Leah sat at the small kitchen table again, a cold sandwich placed in front of her without a word. She ate quietly, watching Amelia move around the kitchen, her movements precise and deliberate, her face unreadable as she checked her phone and gave instructions to the housekeeper about dinner preparations. Leah finished her sandwich and waited, holding the plate carefully, standing to place it in the sink, washing it, as Amelia liked, with hot water, the soap bubbles hiding the trembling in her hands. In the afternoons, Leah would go to her room, the silence of the house pressing against her ears. She would take out her small notebook, the one she kept hidden in the drawer under her socks, and she would draw. She drew pictures of her mother, Lauren's smiling face, her dark hair tied back with a ribbon, her eyes bright with laughter. She drew pictures of herself holding Lauren's hand, standing under the big tree in the garden, the sun shining, the flowers blooming, everything warm and alive. She drew Michael, too, his hand on her shoulder, smiling down at her with the kindness that was rare but treasured. She kept these drawings hidden, knowing that if Amelia found them, they would disappear like the others. Amelia had found a drawing once, a small, crumpled piece of paper that had fallen from Leah's pocket. Leah remembered the way Amelia's lips had pressed into a thin line, the way her fingers had torn the paper in half without a word, dropping the pieces into the trash, telling Leah to stop living in the past. Leah had nodded, eyes down, pressing her lips together so the tears would not fall, swallowing the sob that tried to escape her throat. School was no different. Leah sat in the back of the classroom, her head bent over her work, her pencil moving carefully across the lines of her assignments. She did not raise her hand, did not speak unless spoken to, did not laugh when the other children laughed, did not play during recess, instead sitting on the bench near the fence, her eyes on the ground, clutching her lunchbox in her lap. The teachers noticed, sometimes asking if she was all right, if everything was okay at home. Leah would nod, forcing a small smile, saying, "Yes, ma'am," in the quietest voice she could manage, the fear of Amelia's disappointment a constant weight in her chest. One day, a teacher sent a note home, a gentle request for a meeting to discuss Leah's silence, her withdrawal, her sadness that was visible even to strangers. Amelia intercepted the note, reading it with a cold smile before tearing it in half and dropping it into the trash, telling Leah that school is for learning, not for complaining. Leah nodded, folding into herself, clutching her bear that night, whispering to Lauren's memory that she would be good, that she would not make trouble, that she would be quiet. The house became a place of quiet footsteps and held breaths. Leah learned to clean quickly, to be invisible, to avoid the moments when Amelia's eyes would narrow, when her voice would turn sharp. She learned that mistakes were not allowed, that spilled water was a crime, that crumbs on the floor were failures. She learned that silence was safety, that quiet was survival. Sometimes at night, she would sneak down the hallway to the storage closet, slipping inside and closing the door, sitting among the boxes of Lauren's old clothes, pressing her face into the soft fabric that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfume. She would sit there for hours, breathing in the scent, pressing the bear to her chest, whispering stories to the darkness, stories about a mother who loved her, about a father who was kind, about a house that was warm and safe. Amelia's control was constant, precise, a routine that left no room for mistakes. Leah folded the laundry, each shirt and pair of pants placed perfectly in the basket, the edges lined up as Amelia liked. She swept the hallways, making sure to get every corner, checking twice, sometimes 3 times, to be sure. She dusted the shelves, cleaned the glass doors, washed the dishes, all in silence, all under Amelia's watchful gaze. And every time Michael came home, Leah would try to smile, to look happy, to pretend that everything was fine. She would hug him when he bent down, his arms wrapping around her gently, his cologne a reminder of safety she could almost believe in. He would ask her how her day was, and she would say fine, nodding, smiling, pressing the fear back into her chest, hiding it away where he could not see. Michael would smile, ruffle her hair, kiss the top of her head, telling her he was proud of her, that he loved her. Leah would nod, her bear clutched tightly in her arms, the words sticking in her throat, the truth too dangerous to speak. At night, Leah would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the small cracks in the paint, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. She would close her eyes and try to remember Lauren's songs, the warmth of her mother's arms, the softness of her voice. She would hold her bear close, whispering to it, telling it that she missed her mother, that she was trying to be good, that she was trying to be quiet, that she did not want to make Amelia angry. Sometimes, when the fear became too heavy, when the tears slipped from her eyes and soaked into her pillow, Leah would slip out of bed, moving quietly through the house, down the stairs, across the cold tile floors, out into the backyard where the shadows of the trees swayed in the moonlight. She would walk to the old shed at the edge of the property, the place where Lauren used to store her gardening tools, the place that still smelled of earth and wood. Inside, it was dark, but Leah felt safe there. She would sit on the old wooden chair, her bear in her lap, her feet swinging above the dusty floor, whispering stories to herself, stories of her mother, of a house where she could laugh, where she could play, where she could be loved. She would stay there until the cold made her fingers numb, until the dawn began to lighten the sky, until she felt strong enough to face another day. And when she returned to the house, slipping back into her bed, pulling the blankets around her, she would close her eyes and pretend that she was safe, that she was loved, that the house around her was not filled with small forbiddances and silent rules, but with warmth, with laughter, with the love that Lauren had once promised her. The morning of Leah's birthday arrived with a quiet sky, the clouds hanging low over the Harper estate as a soft drizzle tapped against the tall windows of her room. She awoke before the alarm clock, the faint blue light of dawn brushing across the ceiling as she lay there, clutching her small bear against her chest. Her eyes moved across the room, landing on the small calendar pinned near her desk. The date, circled in purple crayon weeks ago, a hopeful reminder that this day was meant to be special. She lay there for a long time, waiting, listening for the sound of footsteps, of a door opening, of a voice calling her name with a smile. But the house remained still, the silence as heavy as the gray clouds outside. Downstairs, Amelia moved through the kitchen with quiet precision, her robe neatly tied, her hair pulled back tightly, her fingers tapping on her phone as she directed the staff in low tones. The scent of coffee and toasted bread filled the air, but there was no scent of pancakes or the sweet warmth of a birthday cake baking, nothing that hinted at celebration. Leah appeared quietly in the doorway, her hair still slightly damp from the shower, her hands clutching the edge of her sleeves as she stood, waiting for Amelia to notice her. Amelia glanced up, her eyes passing over Leah without a flicker of recognition before she turned back to her phone, typing quickly. "Your breakfast is on the counter," she said without looking up, her voice calm, cool, dismissive. Leah's eyes moved to the plate on the counter, where a single piece of toast, already cold, waited for her beside a glass of water. She moved to the counter, climbing onto the tall stool, picking up the toast and nibbling at the edges, the dry crumbs catching in her throat as she swallowed, her eyes moving toward Amelia, waiting, hoping for a word, a smile, a simple acknowledgement. But Amelia's attention was elsewhere, her voice rising in irritation as she reminded the caterers of the schedule for the evening, her words sharp as she corrected the floral arrangements being delivered later that day. Leah's fingers tightened around the toast as she forced herself to finish it, her eyes dropping to the counter as the cold bread felt like sand in her mouth. She took a sip of water, swallowing down the tightness in her throat, and slid from the stool, carrying the plate to the sink and washing it carefully, just as Amelia expected. The house was alive with preparations, the staff moving quickly, arranging the dining room, cleaning the silver, polishing the glassware, preparing for the evening's event. Leah moved quietly through the hallways, pressing herself against the walls when the staff passed by with trays and boxes, her presence unnoticed in the flurry of activity. She paused by the window, watching as the drizzle became rain, the drops sliding down the glass, her breath fogging the window as she pressed her forehead against it, closing her eyes as she remembered birthdays from before. She remembered Lauren's voice, soft and warm, waking her with a song, the scent of cinnamon rolls filling the air, the laughter that echoed through the house as Lauren carried her downstairs to a table set with balloons and a small cake topped with bright strawberries. She remembered Michael's laughter, too, the way he had lifted her high into the air, spinning her around as she giggled, the way he had kissed Lauren, pulling her close, the three of them laughing together in the kitchen, the world warm and safe. Now the kitchen was quiet, the scent of cinnamon replaced by the sterile smell of coffee and polished counters, the warmth gone, replaced by the cold efficiency of a house that had forgotten how to celebrate. Leah moved to the living room where Amelia was arranging the seating plan for the evening, her fingers moving quickly over the cards, her eyes scanning the list of guests with careful calculation. Leah stood quietly, waiting, hoping for Amelia to look up, to remember, to smile and wish her a happy birthday. But Amelia's eyes remained on the cards, her lips moving as she counted the names, her brow furrowing as she adjusted the placements. "Leah, go upstairs and change your clothes," she said without looking up, her voice brisk. "We have important guests tonight. I don't want you underfoot." Leah opened her mouth, the words trembling on her lips, but she swallowed them, nodding as she turned and walked back toward the stairs, her steps slow, her head bowed. In her room, Leah sat on the edge of her bed, her bear clutched in her lap as she stared at the small stack of drawings she kept hidden under her pillow. She pulled them out, spreading them on the bed, the colors bright against the white sheets, each one a memory, a hope, a dream. She traced her finger over the drawing of Lauren, her mother's smile drawn in soft pencil lines, her arms open, reaching for her. A tear slipped down Leah's cheek, landing on the paper, smudging the pencil slightly as she quickly wiped it away, pressing the drawing to her chest as she closed her eyes. Downstairs, the house was filled with laughter and conversation as the staff prepared for the evening's event. The sounds of clinking glasses and soft music drifting up the stairs to Leah's room. She could hear Amelia's voice, warm and bright as she spoke with the caterers, the sound so different from the sharpness Leah had come to fear. She held her bear close, rocking slightly as she tried to block out the sounds, pressing her face into the bear's fur, whispering softly to herself, "It's okay, it's okay." The rain continued to fall, tapping against the window as the day passed, the light fading into the gray of evening as the house came alive with the glow of chandeliers and the soft flicker of candles. Leah watched from the top of the stairs as guests arrived, their laughter and chatter filling the air as they handed their coats to the staff, moving into the dining room where the tables were set with fine china and crystal glasses. She saw Michael arrive, his coat damp from the rain, his smile tired but present as he greeted the guests, shaking hands, accepting congratulations and compliments, his eyes scanning the room but never looking up the stairs where Leah stood. She wanted to run down to him, to wrap her arms around him, to tell him it was her birthday, to ask him to hold her, to remember her, to see her. But she stayed where she was, her hand gripping the banister, her fingers white as she watched him move through the room, his laughter joining the others, his attention caught in the web of conversations and obligations that pulled him further away from her with every passing moment. When the dinner began, Leah retreated to her room, closing the door softly behind her, sinking to the floor as she pressed her back against the door, her bear in her lap, her eyes closing as the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifted up through the floors, muffled but present, a reminder of the world she was not allowed to join. She stayed there for a long time, the cold from the floor seeping into her legs, her eyes staring blankly at the wall as the hours passed. Eventually, she stood, moving to her desk where she had hidden a small candle, one she had found in the back of a drawer, a leftover piece from a holiday long past. She pulled it out, holding it carefully in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the hope it represented. She took a small piece of bread from the drawer as well, something she had hidden away from breakfast, a small piece she had saved just in case. With the candle and the bread, she moved quietly through the house, slipping down the back stairs, her bare feet silent against the cold floors, her breath quick as she moved through the shadows, avoiding the pools of light where the guests might see her. She stepped out into the rain, the cold drops soaking her hair, her thin sweater clinging to her arms as she moved across the yard, the grass wet and soft under her feet as she made her way to the old shed at the edge of the property. Inside, it was dark and cold, the scent of damp wood and earth filling the air as Leah closed the door behind her, pressing her back against it as she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She moved to the small table in the corner, an old crate turned on its side, where she placed the piece of bread carefully, setting the candle in the center. She searched for the matches she had hidden in a small tin, her fingers shaking as she struck one, the flame flaring to life before she lit the candle, the small flame casting a soft glow in the darkness. Leah sat down in front of the candle, her bear in her lap, the warmth of the flame brushing against her cold skin as she watched it flicker, the shadows dancing across the walls of the shed. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as she whispered to the flame, "Happy birthday, Leah." Her voice was soft, trembling, the words catching in her throat as tears slipped down her cheeks, falling onto the bear's fur, soaking into it as she rocked slightly, the flame the only light in the darkness. She made a wish, a small, silent wish, her lips moving but no sound escaping as she closed her eyes tighter, pressing the bear against her chest. She wished for her mother, for the warmth of her arms, for the sound of her laughter, for the feeling of being loved, of being wanted, of being seen. She wished for Michael to remember, to see her, to come and find her, to hold her and tell her that she mattered, that she was loved, that she was not alone. The candle flickered, the flame bending in the small draft that moved through the cracks in the wood, the shadows shifting and dancing as Leah opened her eyes, staring at the flame, the tears still falling, her heart heavy in her chest. She blew out the candle, the smoke rising in the darkness, the scent of the extinguished flame mixing with the damp air, a thin wisp curling toward the ceiling before disappearing. She sat there in the darkness, the rain tapping against the roof of the shed, the sound a soft lullaby that wrapped around her as she held her bear, closing her eyes, letting the darkness take her as she whispered to herself, "It's okay, it's okay." The words a fragile promise she clung to as the world outside moved on, unaware of the small girl in the shed, alone on her birthday, holding on to hope in the flicker of a single candle. The rain had not stopped by the time the sky darkened over the Harper estate, the drizzle turning to a steady downpour that tapped against the windows in a soft, rhythmic hush. Inside the grand house, laughter spilled from the dining room where guests lingered over wine and dessert, the low hum of conversation rising and falling with the clink of glasses and the gentle strains of music that drifted through the hallways. The air was warm and fragrant with the scent of roasted meats and the soft sweetness of the pastries served, the lights glowing softly in the crystal chandeliers, creating pockets of golden warmth in every room. Leah was not in any of these rooms. She sat alone in the shed, the wooden walls damp with the scent of rain and earth, her small body curled on an old chair, her knees pulled to her chest, the thin sweater clinging to her arms. Her hair was damp from the walk through the rain, the strands curling around her face as she rested her cheek on her knees, her eyes fixed on the small piece of bread sitting on the crate before her. The candle had burned down to a stub before she blew it out, the smoke curling into the darkness, leaving behind a faint scent that mixed with the dampness of the air. She rocked gently, the bear pressed to her chest, the soft fabric soaking up the tears that slid silently down her cheeks as she whispered softly, "Happy birthday, Leah." The words felt empty in the cold darkness, the echo of her voice swallowed by the damp walls, the soft rustling of the rain the only reply. She remembered how her mother used to sing to her on her birthday, the gentle sway of Lauren's voice as she hummed the song that always made Leah feel as if the world was warm and safe, as if every breath was a promise of love. Now there was no song, no warmth, only the soft drip of water from the roof where the rain found its way through small cracks, the drops landing on the floor with a quiet tap that punctuated the silence. Leah's fingers traced the lines of the bear's fur, pressing into it as she closed her eyes, wishing that when she opened them, she would be home again, that she would find herself back in the kitchen with Lauren, the scent of cinnamon and sugar in the air, the warmth of her mother's arms wrapping around her as they laughed together. But when she opened her eyes, she was still in the shed, the darkness pressing in around her, the cold seeping through her sweater, chilling her skin. She hugged the bear tighter, closing her eyes again, trying to remember the sound of her mother's laughter, the feel of her hand brushing Leah's hair back from her face, the soft kiss on her forehead that always made her feel safe. The memories came in soft flashes, flickering like the candle flame that had burned so briefly before the darkness returned. In the house, the laughter continued, the voices rising with the music as the guests enjoyed the evening, unaware of the small girl sitting alone in the shed, waiting, hoping that someone would remember her, that someone would come looking for her, that someone would see her. Leah pressed her forehead against her knees, her breath warming the fabric of her sweater as she whispered softly to herself, "It's okay, it's okay." The words a promise she tried to believe, even as the tears slid down her cheeks, even as the cold settled deeper into her bones. Inside the house, Michael had returned from the meeting, his coat damp from the rain, his hair sprinkled with droplets that glistened in the light as he handed the coat to the housekeeper, brushing the water from his shoulders as he stepped into the warmth of the house. He moved through the guests, his smile tired but genuine, as he shook hands, exchanged greetings, accepted congratulations on the latest hotel opening, the laughter and conversation pulling him further into the evening. But, as he moved through the rooms, his eyes lifted toward the stairs, pausing as he noticed the empty hallway above, the quiet that seemed to press down despite the noise around him. For a moment, the image of Leah flashed in his mind. Her small face turned toward him, her eyes wide and hopeful, the way they used to light up when she saw him, the way she would run to him, wrapping her arms around his legs, laughing as he lifted her into the air. He paused, the smile fading from his lips as he scanned the room, searching for her small figure, but the guests were too many, the noise too loud, the distractions too persistent. He moved to the kitchen, stepping away from the noise, the quiet of the space a brief relief as he glanced around, searching for the small figure that was not there. He asked one of the staff if they had seen Leah, his voice casual, but the tightening in his chest betraying his concern. The staff member shook her head, explaining that she had seen Leah earlier in the day, but had not seen her since. Michael nodded, thanking her, his eyes moving to the window where the rain streaked down the glass, the darkness outside thick and heavy. Something in his chest shifted, a small crack in the wall he had built around himself, the image of Leah's face returning to him, the way she had looked at him the last time he had seen her, her eyes filled with something he could not name, something that had stayed with him even as he buried himself in work, in meetings, in obligations. He turned away from the kitchen, moving through the house, his steps quickening as he moved toward the stairs, climbing them with a purpose he had not felt in a long time. He paused outside Leah's room, knocking softly before opening the door, the darkness of the room greeting him, the empty bed neatly made, the blankets untouched. His breath caught as he stepped inside, looking around, his eyes moving to the small drawings tucked under the pillow, the faint scent of the lavender Lauren used to use still lingering in the air. He moved to the window, looking out into the darkness, the rain falling steadily as he scanned the yard, his heart tightening as he realized the shed door was slightly ajar, the faint glow of a candle's smoke drifting from the crack. Without thinking, he moved quickly down the stairs, through the back hallway, out into the rain, the cold drops soaking through his shirt as he crossed the yard, his feet slipping slightly in the wet grass as he moved toward the shed. He paused at the door, taking a breath before pushing it open, the creak of the hinges loud in the quiet as he stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the darkness as he saw her, small and still, curled on the chair, her arms wrapped around the bear, her eyes lifting to meet his with a mixture of hope and fear. For a moment, neither of them moved, the rain tapping on the roof, the air filled with the scent of damp wood and the faint smoke of the candle. Michael's eyes moved to the crate where the small piece of bread sat, the candle stub beside it, the simple, heartbreaking image striking him with a force that left him breathless. He saw the way Leah's eyes glistened with tears, the way her small body shook with the cold, the way her hands clutched the bear as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. He moved forward, dropping to one knee before her, his hands reaching out to touch her arms, feeling the coldness of her skin, the dampness of her sweater, the small shivers that ran through her body. Leah's eyes watched him, wide and uncertain, the fear and hope battling in the depths of her gaze as she pressed the bear tighter against her chest, her lips trembling as she opened them, but no words came out. Michael's hands moved to her shoulders, his thumbs brushing against the damp fabric as he took a breath, his voice soft, breaking as he whispered, "Leah." Her name felt heavy in the air, the word hanging between them as her eyes filled with tears, the drops sliding down her cheeks, mixing with the rain that clung to her hair, the small sob that escaped her lips the only sound in the room. She fell forward into his arms, the bear pressed between them as she clung to him, her small body shaking with the force of her tears, the sobs tearing from her throat as she buried her face in his chest, the fear and loneliness spilling out in each breath. Michael wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his hand moving over her hair, his own tears mixing with the rain as he held her, rocking her gently as he whispered over and over, "I'm here. I'm here." The rain continued to fall, the sound a soft lullaby around them as they sat there, father and daughter, the cold and darkness of the shed holding them in a fragile embrace as the warmth of the moment began to push back the fear that had settled so deeply in Leah's heart. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt the weight of the world shift, the walls around his heart cracking as he realized how blind he had been, how much he had missed, how much his daughter had suffered while he turned away. He lifted her gently, carrying her out of the shed, the rain soaking them both as he moved across the yard, his steps careful as Leah clung to him, her face pressed into his neck, her tears mixing with the rain. The lights of the house glowed softly through the darkness, guiding them back as he carried her inside, through the warm hallways, past the laughter of the guests who did not notice, did not see, did not know. In the quiet of her room, he set her down on the bed, pulling the blankets around her, brushing the damp curls from her forehead as she looked up at him, her eyes red and tired, but filled with a small spark of hope that had not been there before. He sat beside her, taking her small hand in his, holding it gently as he whispered, "Happy birthday, Leah." The words soft but carrying the weight of a promise that he would keep, that he would be there, that she would never have to celebrate alone again. As she closed her eyes, her hand tightening around his, the rain outside softened to a gentle drizzle, the clouds beginning to part, allowing the faint light of the moon to spill through the window, casting a soft glow over them. The warmth of the room wrapped around them, pushing back the cold of the night, the promise of a new beginning taking root in the quiet, in the small, simple moment of a father holding his daughter, finally seeing her, finally remembering, finally choosing to stay. The night settled quietly over the Harper estate after Michael carried Leah back from the shed, the rain easing into a mist that clung to the windows, leaving soft streaks in the glow of the porch lights. The laughter and clinking glasses from the evening's gathering had died away, guests departing with umbrellas and polite smiles, unaware of the silent shift that had occurred within the household. The staff moved through the house with practiced quiet, clearing dishes and folding linens, the echoes of their work dissolving into the silence that settled as the final door closed and the locks clicked into place. Leah lay beneath the warm blankets in her room, her small frame curled around her bear, the fabric of its fur still damp from her tears. Her breathing had calmed, her eyelids heavy, but her eyes flickered open each time she felt the weight of the past day pressing against her chest, the fear that it had all been a fragile dream. Each time, she saw Michael sitting in the chair beside her bed, his shoulders curved forward, his hands folded, his gaze steady and tired as he watched over her, refusing to leave. When she opened her eyes, he would smile gently, the lines near his eyes deepening, and she would close her eyes again, reassured that he was still there, still watching, still choosing to stay. In the quiet of the room, Michael's mind moved through the memories of the evening. The sight of his daughter alone in the shed, the candle burning down to nothing, the piece of bread set carefully as if it were a feast. The image of her small, shivering body, her eyes wide with hope and fear as she saw him in the doorway, had carved itself deeply into him, refusing to leave as he sat in the darkness of her room. He thought of Lauren, the way she had moved through the house with a soft, warm presence, the way Leah had laughed in her arms, the way the house had felt alive and whole when she was there. He thought of the promises he had made, the ones he had allowed to fade under the weight of meetings, deals, and the endless call of obligations that had seemed so important until the moment he saw his daughter alone, celebrating her birthday in the dark. As dawn approached, Michael finally rose from the chair, careful not to wake Leah as he moved to the window, looking out over the grounds where the fog lay low across the grass, the trees swaying gently in the early breeze. He pressed his hand against the glass, the cold grounding him as he closed his eyes, letting the memory of Leah's voice, soft and trembling as she whispered to herself in the shed, wash over him, reminding him of how blind he had allowed himself to become. He had seen her as another responsibility to manage, another part of his life that could be handled with schedules and caretakers, believing that safety and comfort were enough. But safety meant nothing without warmth, without love, without the quiet, everyday presence that Lauren had given so freely, the presence Leah still craved, even in silence. The morning began slowly, the light creeping across the floorboards, brushing against Leah's bed as she stirred, blinking sleepily as her eyes adjusted to the pale glow. She lifted her head, her eyes finding Michael still there, standing by the window, his figure outlined in the soft light. For a moment, fear flickered in her gaze, the instinctive fear that he would leave, that he would slip away back into the world of phone calls and meetings, that the promise of his presence would dissolve with the morning light. But he turned, his eyes meeting hers, and he offered a tired but true smile, one that reached his eyes, softening them in a way she had not seen for a long time. "Good morning, Leah," he said softly, his voice carrying across the room, warm and sure, grounding them both in the moment. She clutched her bear, her small fingers twisting in the fur, before she nodded, her lips parting in the smallest of smiles, a cautious, fragile thing, but real. The day unfolded differently from those before it. Michael did not leave for meetings, did not disappear behind the heavy doors of his office, did not press a kiss to the top of Leah's head with distracted words before hurrying away. Instead, he sat with her at the breakfast table, watching as she stirred her oatmeal, her movements slow, hesitant, as if she were waiting for the moment to end. He noticed the way her shoulders flinched each time Amelia's footsteps sounded from the hallway, the way her eyes dropped to her bowl, her small hands trembling slightly as she lifted the spoon to her lips. Amelia moved through the kitchen with her usual quiet authority, her eyes sharp as she noticed Michael sitting there, his coffee untouched as he watched Leah. She offered him a smile, smooth and practiced, but he saw the flicker in her eyes, the brief tightening around, her mouth as she glanced at Leah, then back at him, measuring the moment, calculating. "You have a busy day, Michael," she said, her voice light, casual, but Michael heard the edge beneath the words, the unspoken expectation that he would leave, that he would return to the routine that allowed her to control the house, to control Leah. "Not today," he replied simply, his eyes holding hers as he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Amelia's smile faltered for the briefest moment before it returned, tighter now as she turned away, her hands moving to the sink as she began to rinse the dishes, the sound of the water filling the silence that followed. Leah's eyes lifted to Michael, uncertainty and hope mingling in her gaze as she watched him, searching for signs that this moment would last. He offered her another small smile, nodding gently, letting her know without words that he was there, that he was staying. After breakfast, Michael suggested they take a walk in the garden, the morning air cool and fresh as they stepped outside, the dew glistening on the grass, the sky beginning to clear as the sun broke through the last of the clouds. Leah walked beside him, her steps small and hesitant, her eyes moving to the ground as they moved along the path Lauren had loved, the flowers still blooming in careful beds along the edges, their colors bright against the green. They paused by the old tree where Lauren used to read to Leah, the branches spreading wide, offering a comforting shade even as the sunlight filtered through the leaves. Michael sat on the bench beneath the tree, patting the space beside him, waiting as Leah stood for a moment, her eyes on the bench, the memory of her mother's laughter echoing softly in her mind. Slowly, she moved to sit beside him, her bear in her lap, her fingers twisting in the fabric as she stared ahead, her breathing quiet. For a long time, they sat in silence, the sounds of the garden around them, the soft rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds in the trees, the distant hum of the staff moving about their duties. Michael did not speak, did not rush her, simply allowing the silence to settle, letting it become something comforting rather than heavy, allowing her to feel the presence she had been denied for so long. Finally, Leah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, the words trembling as they left her lips. "Daddy," she said, the words so soft, so fragile it nearly broke him. "I'm here, Leah," he replied, his voice steady, the promise in the words clear and unwavering. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining with tears that she did not let fall, her lips pressing together as she struggled to speak the words she had held inside for so long. "I was so scared," she whispered, her voice breaking as the tears finally slipped down her cheeks, falling onto the bear in her lap. Michael reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, his thumb brushing against the fabric of her sweater as he looked into her eyes, seeing the pain, the fear, the loneliness that had taken root there. "I know," he said softly, his own eyes filling with tears as he held her gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to let her carry the weight alone. "I'm so sorry, Leah. I should have seen. I should have been here." The words were heavy, but they were true, and in speaking them Michael felt the first crack of the wall within him breaking away, the guilt and the regret pouring out as he looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, seeing her for the first time in a long time. Leah's small body shook with silent sobs as she leaned into him, her head resting against his chest as he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the morning light filtered through the branches, casting a warm glow over them. In that moment, Michael made a promise to himself, to Lauren's memory, and most importantly, to Leah, that he would no longer turn away, no longer hide behind work and obligations, no longer allow the silence of the house to swallow the laughter that should have filled its rooms. He would be present, he would be patient, and he would be there every day to remind Leah that she was loved, that she was seen, that she was never alone. As they sat beneath the tree, the world around them moving gently, the garden alive with the quiet beauty of the morning, Leah closed her eyes, her breathing steadying as she clung to her father, allowing herself to believe, for the first time in a long time, that the promise would be kept. The following days in the Harper estate passed not with the hurried, cold rhythm they once did, but with a quiet vigilance that made every footstep echo with purpose. The morning light felt different as it fell into Leah's room, touching the soft blanket tucked around her small body as she awoke to the sound of birds outside her window instead of the sharp click of Amelia's heels in the hallway. She blinked in the gentle light, her bear pressed to her chest, her eyes seeking the doorway. There, leaning against the frame, was Michael, his arms crossed softly, a tired but true smile on his lips that deepened the lines around his eyes. He was there, truly there, and Leah let out the breath she had not realized she had been holding. Michael had not left the house since that night he found her in the shed. He moved through the hallways with an attentive presence, greeting the staff, stepping into rooms he had long ignored, noticing the fading paint on the doors, the small drawings tucked into corners, the quiet hush that fell whenever he entered. He no longer disappeared into the depths of his office for hours behind a heavy door, but sat at the breakfast table with Leah, pouring her a glass of orange juice with hands that trembled only slightly from lack of sleep, watching her eat the warm porridge prepared by the cook, ensuring it was not served cold on a cracked plate set apart from everyone else. Amelia moved through the house with the same careful grace, her eyes catching Michael's as she passed, her lips pulling into a controlled smile that did not reach her eyes. She tried, at first, to maintain the routines she had enforced for so long, reminding Leah to fold the blankets tightly, to keep her room neat, to eat quietly without spilling a drop. But each time she corrected the girl with that clipped, cold tone, Michael would lift his eyes, meeting hers with a calm that was unshakable, a calm that silenced her before words could sharpen into the cutting shapes Leah feared. Amelia would pause, her lips tightening as she adjusted a vase or straightened a chair before turning away, the air shifting behind her as Michael returned his gaze to Leah, offering her a small nod that told her it was all right to keep eating, to keep breathing, to simply exist. In the evenings, Michael would walk with Leah through the garden Lauren had loved, the cool breeze of early autumn brushing against their faces as they moved along the winding paths. Leah would clutch her bear, her small fingers curling around its worn fur as she glanced up at Michael, her eyes brightening with each moment he stayed, each step he took beside her. They paused at the large oak tree where Lauren used to read stories, sitting on the weathered bench beneath its branches, letting the leaves fall softly around them as the light faded into the gentle glow of dusk. Michael would speak softly, telling Leah about her mother, about how much she had loved the garden, how she had once danced beneath the falling leaves, laughing with Leah in her arms. Leah would close her eyes, letting the breeze carry the memory, letting it settle over her like a promise of warmth. Inside the house, the tension that had lived in the corners, in the small silences that followed Amelia's footsteps, began to crack. Michael had begun to watch closely, seeing the small bruises on Leah's wrist that had not faded, the faint lines of fear that crossed her face whenever Amelia's voice rose even slightly. He saw how Leah would flinch at the sound of footsteps, how her eyes would dart to Amelia's face, searching for a sign of anger, of disapproval, of the coldness that had become her constant shadow. Michael felt each of these small signs like needles beneath his skin, each one piercing through the wall of excuses he had built, excuses of work, of providing, of assuming that safety and wealth could replace presence and love. One morning, Michael found himself in his office, sitting at the heavy desk where he had signed contracts worth millions, where he had built an empire that now felt hollow in the quiet of the room. He opened the drawer where Lauren's letters still rested, her handwriting looping across the pages, soft reminders of a love that had once filled the house. He found the letter she had written the day they adopted Leah, her words soft but firm, reminding him that love was not just a word but a choice, a daily promise to see, to protect, to stand beside those who needed it most. The guilt that settled in his chest was heavy, but he did not turn away from it. Instead, he picked up the phone, dialing the number of the lawyer he trusted, asking questions he should have asked long ago. He asked about guardianship, about the rights of a child, about the protections that should have been in place, about what could be done now to ensure that Leah would never again have to spend her birthday alone in a cold shed with a piece of bread and a candle that burned out too quickly. Amelia noticed the change in the house. She noticed the way the staff began to watch her, the way Michael's eyes no longer softened when she smiled, the way he now questioned the reports she gave him about Leah's behavior, the way he insisted on seeing Leah's schoolwork himself, speaking to her teachers, reading the notes she tried to hide beneath her pillow. Amelia tried to assert her control, her voice rising in carefully measured tones, her arguments sharp and lined with the cold logic she had used for so long to justify her discipline, her silence, her dismissals. But Michael did not waver. He listened, his face calm, his eyes unblinking, his responses soft but final. He spoke to the staff, gathering their quiet testimonies, learning about the moments they had witnessed but felt powerless to stop, the cold punishments, the silent dinners, the small, cruel words that had chipped away at Leah's spirit day by day. He spoke to Leah, kneeling beside her as she sat on her bed, his hands resting on hers as he asked her to tell him the truth, assuring her that it was safe, that she could speak, that he would not leave, that he would believe her. At first, Leah was quiet, her eyes dropping to her bare, her fingers twisting in the fabric as she shook her head, the fear too deeply rooted to allow words to come. But Michael waited, patient, his presence a steady warmth beside her, his voice soft as he told her about the promises he had made to her mother, about the promises he was making to her now. Slowly, Leah began to speak, her voice trembling, the words small and broken as she told him about the cold dinners, about the harsh words, about the nights locked in her room, about the fear that had become her constant companion. Each word was a blade, each sentence a wound that cut through Michael's heart, but he did not look away, did not flinch, did not interrupt. He listened, his eyes on hers, his hands holding hers as she spoke, letting her pour out the fear, the loneliness, the small, quiet moments of cruelty that had stolen her laughter, her trust, her childhood. When the words became too heavy, when her voice broke, Michael pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, his tears falling into her hair as he whispered, "I'm here, Leah. I'm here." In the days that followed, Michael began to gather the evidence he needed. He documented the bruises, the stories, the testimonies, the patterns of behavior that had lived in the shadows of his house. He spoke with the family lawyer, preparing the documents that would remove Amelia's control, that would protect Leah, that would reclaim the promise he had made to Lauren, the promise he had failed to keep for too long. Each step was deliberate, each decision made with the clarity of a father who had finally begun to see, who had finally chosen to act. Amelia sensed the shift, her control slipping through her fingers as Michael moved through the house with a quiet authority she could not challenge. She tried to argue, to cry, to demand, but Michael's responses were calm, unwavering, his decisions final. The day he served her the papers, the divorce, and the restraining order, she stood in the kitchen, her face pale, her hands trembling as she read the words that ended her control. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and fury. But Michael's eyes were steady, clear, reflecting the promise he had made to Leah. Leah watched from the hallway, her bear in her arms, her heart pounding as she saw Amelia's face, the anger that twisted her features before she turned away, leaving the house that had been her stage, her kingdom, her place of quiet cruelty. As the door closed behind Amelia, the house exhaled, the silence that followed no longer heavy with fear but open, a space waiting to be filled with warmth, with laughter, with the gentle promise of healing. That evening, Michael sat with Leah in the living room, the fire crackling softly in the hearth as they shared a simple dinner, the warmth of the room wrapping around them as Leah leaned against him, her eyes closing as she felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing. The shadows in the corners of the room no longer felt like threats but like quiet guardians, witnesses to the promise that was finally being kept. Outside, the garden Lauren had loved was quiet, the leaves shifting softly in the breeze, the stars beginning to appear in the clear sky above. Inside, the house that had once been silent with fear began to breathe again, each moment a step toward a future where Leah would never again have to fear the sound of footsteps in the hallway, where her laughter could return, where her childhood could begin again, safely, warmly, in the arms of the father who had finally returned. The morning after Amelia's departure arrived softly, without the sharp edges that had cut into the rhythm of the house for so long. The sun lifted gently over the Harper estate, spilling light into the hallways, touching the portraits of Lauren that lined the walls, making them glow as if she were there, quietly nodding in approval at the air of change that had begun to breathe through every room. The staff moved carefully through their duties, their steps lighter, their voices soft but no longer hushed with tension. The heavy silence that had once settled in corners like a warning had lifted, replaced with something tender and uncertain, the fragile peace of a house learning to live again. Leah awoke to this new light, blinking against the sun streaming through the curtains, her bear clutched against her chest as she turned toward the door, half expecting the sharp call of her name, the cold demands that had started each day of her life for as long as she could remember. Instead, there was quiet, soft and unthreatening, filled only with the distant sounds of birds outside her window, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the comfort and hush of a home at peace. She lay there for a moment, her small hand brushing over the worn fur of her bear, the silence wrapping around her like a warm blanket, as she allowed herself to believe, if only for that moment, that she was safe. Downstairs, Michael stood in the kitchen, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up, the scent of coffee and toasted bread filling the air around him as he prepared breakfast. His hands moved awkwardly, unfamiliar with the weight of the pan, the heat of the stove, the careful precision required to crack eggs without breaking the yolks. But he worked patiently, reminding himself with every action that this was how love was shown, not in grand gestures or expensive gifts, but in the quiet, daily choices to be present, to serve, to nourish. He thought of Lauren as he moved, remembering the way she had stood in this same kitchen, humming softly as she cooked, the way Leah had laughed from the counter where she sat swinging her feet, waiting for the pancakes Lauren would shape into hearts and stars, the small moments that had made the house feel alive. When Leah entered the kitchen, her steps quiet, her hair falling in soft curls around her face, Michael looked up, his face breaking into a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes, lighting them in a way that made Leah pause at the threshold, blinking up at him as if unsure she was truly seeing him. He held out his hand to her, nodding towards the table where he had set out 2 plates, the eggs warm, the toast golden, the juice freshly poured into glasses that caught the morning light and made it dance across the table. Leah moved toward him, her steps hesitant, her bear still clutched to her chest as she climbed onto the chair, her eyes watching him carefully, searching for the hidden tension she had learned to expect in every gesture, every smile. But there was none. Michael sat across from her, picking up his fork, nodding encouragingly toward her plate as he began to eat, his movements unhurried, his presence solid and warm. Leah glanced at her plate, her small fingers reaching for the fork, pausing as she looked back at Michael, her eyes asking the question she could not yet speak aloud. He nodded again, smiling softly, and she lowered her gaze, taking a small bite, the warmth of the food surprising her, comforting her in a way that made her chest tighten as she swallowed, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes before she quickly blinked them away. After breakfast, they stepped out into the garden, the air crisp with the promise of autumn, the leaves beginning to shift into hues of gold and amber, the flowers Lauren had planted still blooming in bright defiance of the cooling air. Leah walked beside Michael, her hand slipping into his, her fingers small and cold against his larger, calloused palm. He squeezed her hand gently, guiding her along the path that wound through the garden, stopping at the tree where Lauren had once read stories, the bench beneath it still sturdy, still waiting. They sat together, the silence between them no longer heavy but filled with the soft sounds of the world around them, the rustling leaves, the chirping birds, the distant hum of life continuing in the safety of their reclaimed home. Leah leaned against Michael, her head resting against his arm as she closed her eyes, the warmth of the sun brushing against her face as she allowed herself to breathe deeply, to let the fear slip away with each exhale, to let the hope she had once hidden away rise quietly within her. Michael spoke softly, telling her stories about Lauren, about the way she had loved the garden, the way she had danced beneath the tree with Leah in her arms, laughing as the leaves fell around them. He told Leah about the promises he had made to her mother, about the way he had failed to keep them, about the way he planned to keep them now, every day, for the rest of their lives. Leah listened, her eyes closed, the words soaking into her like warmth, like light, like the gentle promise of safety. In the days that followed, the house continued to shift, to heal, to fill with the quiet laughter that had been missing for so long. Michael stayed home, learning to cook Leah's favorite meals, learning to braid her hair with careful fingers that fumbled but persisted, learning to read with her at night. His voice soft as he stumbled over the characters and the stories she loved, learning to be present, truly present, in a way that rebuilt the trust that had been broken. They painted Leah's room together, choosing soft colors of lavender and cream, hanging her drawings on the walls, framing them with care, celebrating the small artist Leah was becoming. They bought new sheets, soft and warm, replacing the old, cold ones that had been a reminder of the nights Leah spent afraid to sleep. They opened the windows, letting the fresh air cleanse the space, letting the light fill the corners that had once felt heavy with fear. Leah chose a small lamp with stars on its shade, and each night Michael would turn it on, the soft glow casting gentle patterns on the ceiling as Leah drifted to sleep, her bear tucked beside her, the promise of safety in the light above her. One afternoon, as autumn deepened, Michael and Leah baked cookies in the kitchen, flour dusting their hands, laughter rising between them as they shaped the dough into clumsy hearts and stars, Leah's giggles filling the air in a way that made Michael's chest ache with gratitude. They shared the cookies with the staff, who smiled warmly, their eyes soft as they watched the quiet transformation of a house once ruled by tension into a home filled with warmth. When Leah's birthday came again, the house was ready. Michael spent the morning preparing a breakfast of pancakes shaped like hearts and stars, just as Lauren once had, letting Leah pour the syrup and add the berries, letting her laugh as the syrup dripped onto the table, not scolding her but laughing with her as they cleaned it together. They decorated the living room with balloons, soft colors that danced in the gentle breeze from the open windows, the scent of fresh flowers filling the space. Leah wore a dress Michael had let her choose, a soft blue that made her eyes shine, her hair falling in curls that he had carefully brushed, his fingers gentle as he worked through the tangles. The cake was simple, covered in white frosting with fresh strawberries, a single candle placed in the center, waiting. Leah stood before it, her eyes bright, her smile soft but sure, her bear sitting beside the cake as if it too were ready to celebrate. Michael knelt beside her, his arm around her shoulders as he whispered, "Make a wish, Leah." She closed her eyes, her lips moving silently as she made her wish, the room quiet except for the soft sound of her breath, the gentle rustle of the balloons above them. When she opened her eyes, she looked at Michael, her gaze steady, her smile growing as she blew out the candle, the small flame flickering before disappearing, leaving only the warmth of the moment behind. The room filled with soft applause, the staff clapping quietly, the sound warm and welcoming, a celebration of a birthday that was no longer marked by loneliness, but by the presence of love, of family, of safety. That evening, as the stars appeared in the clear sky, Michael and Leah stepped out onto the porch, the air cool, the scent of autumn leaves drifting on the breeze. They sat together, Leah's head resting against Michael's arm, her bear tucked in her lap as they watched the stars, the quiet of the world wrapping around them like a blanket. Michael spoke softly, telling Leah about the constellations, pointing out the shapes in the sky, his voice steady, comforting, the words weaving stories that made Leah smile, made her eyes shine with curiosity, with hope, with the simple joy of a child who was finally allowed to be a child. In that moment, beneath the stars, on the porch of a house that had once been filled with shadows, Leah and Michael found a peace that had been missing for too long. The fear that had once ruled their days was gone, replaced with the soft, enduring promise of love, of presence, of the quiet, unspoken vow that no matter what the world brought, they would face it together, hand in hand, where the light now lived. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Check out the next video and explore others on the channel for more true and powerful stories that stay with you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share this video with them. Thank you.